Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Studio 8.1, episode 68, where myself, Jarvis Todd, and Paul Skeldon will be talking about tariffs and what do they mean for the telemedia industry. We'll also be covering the conference sessions, which are coming up in the World Telemedia Dubai in about a month's time. So, without further ado, hello, Paul.
Hello, mate.
Thank you very much for joining me. Let's talk about tariffs. So, everybody is basically talking about tariffs right now across the world. And unless you've been living in a cave, you will now know that Donald Trump has been imposing tariffs on imports into the US. That's having an extremely significant knock-on effect across the globe. And we're going to look specifically now about what that means for the telemedia industry. And I know that we've seen some interesting, already some interesting data coming from Juniper Research. I suppose at first glance, you might assume that the telemedia industry being sort of digital services probably not going to be impacted. But in fact, that isn't the case, Paul, is it?
Well, before we start, what I'd like to say is that we don't really know what the impact might be. So I've tried to sort of talk to a few people and do a bit of research to sort of try and understand. Because as you say, it's a digital business, but it is global and it's reliant on a lot of components. And of course, I think there is a sort of consumer angle, which I'll come to in a bit. But I think fundamentally, we don't know what the impact is, but I think there will be an impact, assuming things continue as they are with this sort of tit for tat. Sort of, it's essentially a trade war, isn't it? As each side keeps raising their tariffs to try and sort of outdo each other, it becomes quite difficult. Um, Talking to people in the industry, the thing that's sort of foremost, I think, currently the likely threat is the cost of equipment. So the cost of smartphones will go up, the cost of network equipment will go up. So all of those things will have an impact on telemedia because there'll be fewer people with smartphones. There'll be fewer sort of 5G network rollouts, fewer 4G network rollouts. I think all the servers and equipment that sit behind running all the content services and all that sort of thing, all that is also going to be impacted because it's made all over the world. I mean, a lot of it's assembled in the US out of components from China, from Taiwan, and elsewhere. And I think if there, it's hard to know where the tariffs are going to apply, but they're going to apply somewhere in that sort of manufacturing value chain, and that cost will be passed on to the people who buy that equipment. So network operators are going to find higher costs. The service providers themselves are going to face higher costs in equipment, and consumers are going to face higher costs in smartphones. So I think there is that immediate effect that this could have a big impact, and it'll be global. The other thing, of course, is that
Well,
it.
wait.
Go, go on, go on.
Sorry,
Yep.
let me just interrupt there for a second. So I think there's no question that what you've just said is absolutely true. But what I think was very interesting, based on the fact that we're talking primarily about sort of hardware costs, tech costs, platform costs, and you obviously mentioned the significant potential impact on MNOs and their bottom line. Now, I am going to be a bit more positive, and I notice from the story, of course, the fourth point was a reduction in consumer spending. Now,
Yeah.
that I think is possibly the only thing that's
Mm.
going to impact the telemedia industry. And what I would also like to maybe suggest is if you've got the hardware going up, and if you've got MNOs coming under increasing pressures because their costs are going up, it might well be, Paul, may I suggest that they might look to the value-added services industry as a way of boosting those revenues and perhaps giving our industry a little bit more attention than perhaps,
Mm.
as we've talked about before, they have in the past. We know that when mobile operators engage with telemedia, they can drive significant profits. But certainly in Europe, if the telemedia industry has not always been a priority for those MNOs. Maybe this might be a driver to get them to be a little
Mm.
bit more focused on the world of telemedia.
Absolutely, it's a very good point. That was something I was going to raise. It's not in the sort of think piece that published yesterday, but it's something I'm looking at to sort of follow up. Is that yes, it's likely to cause some sort of recession, possibly a global recession, but that's not always bad news for our sector because often when there's a downturn, people don't go out, they don't spend their money on big ticket items, but they still want to be entertained and amused, and they turn to these sort of lower cost micro payment based services to entertain themselves. Just as we saw during the pandemic, where things sort of looked like they were going to be, this was the end of business as we knew it. It actually became a massive boom time for telemedia and drove the uptake of carrier billing and all sorts of things, OTT messaging as a marketing channel, all those things. So yeah, there are potentially some positives out of this. I think as well we're going to see on the equipment side and on this sort of consumer side the fact that countries are going to just sort of ring fence off the US and do more dealing with each other. So I think there's also a very big positive there as well, that we're going to see a lot more interaction between markets that don't involve the US. I think sort of potentially in Europe, I think Europe's not influence, but Europe's sort of business sort of opportunities in MENA and Africa and India are going to possibly accelerate. Of course, China will do the same. So there's a sort of, we'll be competing with them. But I think there are some positives for our industry. I think costs of doing business might go up, and there might be hidden things we don't yet know about because it's a digital market. We don't quite know how or what Donald Trump might do around digital services, especially things like TikTok.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is interesting. And I think you also now bring us on nicely to the sort of second section of that story, which does highlight that the the impact on Europe, MENA, Africa, and India will be quite different.
Mm,
So let's take each one of those. Let's take each one of those in order. Europe specifically, obviously higher import costs. We've talked about the manufacturing and the hardware side of things. The story also then starts to reference things like services, streaming services, gaming apps, etc. Let's talk about Europe just for a moment.
Well, Europe, yes, as you say, sort of is likely to be impacted by import costs. I think the equipment, the hardware, software cost issue is going to be particularly sort of damaging in Europe because I think we're much more reliant on sort of US products. We have much more integrated into it and buy more of them, so that potentially that's more expensive. I think streaming platforms and gaming apps, a lot of those are based in the US. I think possibly that might involve costs. Again, it's hard to know because it's a service that we're consuming here in Europe that's hosted in the US. Is that something that's going to be affected by tariffs? I don't think currently it is, but it could well be because Mr. Trump does sort of change what he does quite quickly. So I think sort of from a European point of view, it's possibly more damaging here. I think in other regions, it might be less so. I think to some degree in MENA, they're not so dependent on the US, are they?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about MENA. Again, referring to the article, I mean, a lot of the suggestions in this article are sort of relating to their economies being dependent on oil, and that might have a knock-on effect to lower disposable incomes. Going back to what I said earlier, would suggest that your disposable income goes down, you start not having holidays and buying cars, but telemedia services might
Mm,
well remain strong. But there was also an interesting point that you or the suggestion might be that actually some local players might actually benefit as well. And yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
yes, I think that sort of in the MENA market, particularly, it's more it's less sort of US centric. It doesn't have that kind of input, and it already has quite a sort of organic base of local players. And I think that's likely to potentially increase. I think the oil price side of things is also perhaps a double-edged sword. I think they might be exporting less to the US, but they might be exporting more elsewhere because people won't buy US oil.
Yeah.
So I think it may have limited effect on their sort of income and that. And I agree that the spend will be possibly impacted positively by consumers will have a need to buy these services rather than bigger ticket items. So yes, I think MENA possibly more sort of insulated from it than some of the other regions. I suspect. I think it comes down to devices as well. They're not going to be able to buy as many iPhones because they'll be more
Well,
expensive.
yeah, you say that, but I mean, we've talked about the advent of 5G, 6G, 7G, 8G, and
Mm,
how that's going to impact or enable the delivery of even more wonderful services. That said, where we're at the moment with sort of four stroke five, service levels and content levels are of an extremely high standard.
mm,
And to a certain extent, I wonder whether or not, there's going to be any sort of consumer fatigue if this is actually where we're going to be for, the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Um, content innovations, content creation, understanding consumers' taste. I wonder whether or not, the content creators are still going to be able to work within the technical
mm,
kind of environment that they've got to find really compelling services and continue to entertain and engage consumers at, as we've already talked about, levels where perhaps a reduction in income isn't going to be such a big have such a big impact.
mm,
So again, I wonder whether or not the industry. I mean, I think the industry, everyone should be worried, but I wonder whether or not the telemedia industry might not actually flourish in those circumstances. I would also just sort of add into that that interestingly, when we were putting together the conference for World Telemedia in Dubai, which is coming up on the 11th, 12th, and 13th of May, um, I was talking to one player based in the Lebanon. I was talking about some particularly interesting markets, and Palestine was raised as an interesting market, and
mm,
given what's been going on there, they made the point that even in a situation, a terrible situation where your country is at war and you're being bombarded, people still need to communicate, people still need to have light relief, and they still want to use their
mm,
phones and consume telemedia services, whether it's information, health and well-being, education, all those sorts of things, games. And they've actually seen, or identified the Palestinian market as actually being pretty
mm,
interesting given those terrible circumstances. So if you transpose that across to what we've just said in MENA, with regards to some kind of tragedy based on their oil economy, again, I would argue that perhaps things might not be as bad as for the telemedia industry as we might think. Now, let's talk about Africa.
mm. Yes, I mean, I think similarly, the same sort of issues apply to Africa. I think in Africa, well, and also in MENA, there is already quite a good sort of local uh, setup of services. Um, Particularly in Africa and certain African countries, that they are drawn more to their own sort of domestic streaming services. So while Netflix and Spotify and those services are used, there's a lot of domestic ones that are more popular, showing local content. And I think we're going to see that those services probably flourish because of this. Already there's a sort of suspicion about some of these big corporate US things. I think the fact that they might well be now very expensive or just tainted by the sort of bad sort of karma that comes with Trump and his tariffs, that people will just turn more and more to the domestic and local market. That'll encourage more services. I think, as you were saying about MENA and about 4 and 5G, I mean, let's not forget the Chinese have all the tech equipment to roll out 5G networks. We chose not to do it here in the UK because of sort of fears that there was some sort of espionage angle. But China already has a huge soft power influence in Africa this sort of thing could be a real boon to sort of Chinese
Huawei's.
equipment
Yeah.
makers, the Huawei's of this world and the like, because they're already entrenched in Africa. Africans are going to want more of these services. They're going to build it on something. Maybe it ends the sort of US hegemony over having the sort of tech and the platforms. And I think we're
Yeah.
going to see all sorts of things emerge. New social media platforms, and new streaming platforms, new gaming platforms, new games. And all the things like when I was in Marbella talking to Hungama about their combining sort of gaming and music into sort of apps that do both at the same time, like a gamification of music. You think you're going to see a lot of this huge amount of innovation from these countries. Maybe now gets a more unfettered access to the market. So yes, I think there are positives with it, definitely.
Let's keep a positive spin on things. One of the things I just added into that with regards to Africa, I mean, we've talked about the obvious impact on the cost of the device, but of course, we've reported many, many times about, I mean, obviously, markets and regions and territories are all at different stages of their evolution, and we've talked at length in over the past couple of years about how actually quite a lot of old school telemedia services are doing quite well in more remote African regions based on the sort of penetration of feature phones. And
Mm,
some of those markets will not be affected because it's not driven by a consumer base that are constantly upgrading to the latest device. And there are actually lots of consumer bases, certainly within the African continent, probably the Indian continent too, where feature phone MVAS services are still doing extremely well, and you know will continue to do extremely well because it's not based on upgrading the devices on a regular basis, and therefore the fact that an Apple iPhone has increased, has doubled in VAT, is doubled in cost, won't have
mm,
any impact whatsoever on those regions. And of course, as long as those feature phones are working, the payment mechanisms like M-Pesa are still working very well. So
mm.
again, I'm going to be the positive face of the telemedia industry at this point. In fact, we are going to be the positive face
Hmm.
of the
Yeah,
telemedia.
yeah. No, I think there's many upsides, absolutely. And I think,
Now,
you know, with all these things, which I think sort of to some degree, perhaps the sort of Trump government don't appreciate is that there's always a will to do business. So if you can't do it in one way, you'll find another.
somewhere else.
And there are lots of there's a lot of Chinese smartphones. There's beginnings of an Indian smartphone industry. There's not going to be a shortage of devices. I don't think there's going to be a shortage of equipment.
I agree.
It's just a bit of a delay while networks and consumers change tack and buy something different. But
Yeah, I agree.
ultimately, it will carry on business as usual.
Yeah, I agree. Let's just finish up by talking about India because obviously, again, looking ahead to World Telemedia Dubai, I mean, one of the reasons for moving the show across or adding a show in the MENA region was to be a little bit more accessible to the continent of India, Africa, as we've already mentioned. Now, obviously, from a sort of production point of view, there's definitely a suggestion that India might do rather well out of this because of their
Mm.
capabilities to produce hardware. And so it looks like that potentially this could be boom time for India, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been doing some research into the Indian market for the next issue of Telemedia magazine and for the conference in Dubai and the session there on the Indian market. And India is quite an interesting and sort of self-contained market. It's a massive market. It already makes a huge amount of money or generates a huge amount of revenue around MVAS. Uh, so I think in some ways it's already got the beginnings of doing this. I think it has got a nascent smartphone manufacturing industry. I think for companies or countries and consumers who maybe don't want to buy Chinese, there's an opportunity to buy Indian, particularly in the Indian market, and to some degree, sort of Southeast Asia as well might sort of turn to those. So yes, I think it too has a huge sort of opportunity. I think all these or regions do, and I think the interesting thing is that actually, the more you look at them, the more you realise that they're reasonably independent from US influence, having been soft power influenced by China for many, many years. So
Mm.
yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff. I mean, the piece I did yesterday is very much the sort of these are some of the sort of problems. I think I am working on another companion piece that's going to look at the the upsides, which I shall publish in a few days' time, and with much added information thanks to our chat, I have to say.
Ah, right.
But there are a lot of positives potentially. It's not all negative. The corollary to that, though, is we don't know what he's going to do next. So
No, who knows?
that's the problem with trying to do this.
Just to sort of, I don't want to be sort of blindly positive about the telemedia industry, but after 30 years, it's quite difficult not to be, because we're still here and we're if anything, thriving in 2025. The issue of cross-border payments does slightly concern me. And this was a point raised by Juniper Research, Michael Greenwood, the senior analyst over there, who suggested that, cross-border payments are a complex area in their own right. And he did feel that there might be some impact on this particular aspect of business. Now, cross-border payments, of course, are fundamentally essential for the telemedia industry. This business has been and continues to be quite brilliant at opening up new markets. It doesn't really matter where you're based. Obviously, local partnerships are essential, but the process of running a successful global network of markets for your services does, of course, require a pretty slick process of cross-border payments. If that aspect of the telemedia industry is impacted by this, then I think there are some reasons to be a little bit concerned.
Yes, I think that is a potential huge downside. I think the complexity of cross-border payments could be made more complex by this. Any sort of interaction with the dollar, so wherever the money becomes dollars or dollars become other currencies, which is often how money is moved around, is going to be difficult. I think there's already, even if the process doesn't get more difficult, there's the issue that the value of the dollar is plummeting. At best, it's going to be volatile for some time, going up and down. So I think there are problems there with what sort of the cost of doing payments might actually be, and that will squeeze. Well, as Michael says in his excellent blog, the link is in the story we're talking about. He goes into a lot of detail about the sort of dollar market and why this is potentially significant. But essentially, it is this idea that moving money about can become more complex, more costly. You don't know how much you're going to get at the end of the day because of currency conversions. It's going to squeeze a lot of new players in the payment space, particularly, he says, in countries like Vietnam. But I think it does apply across the board because they don't have the margin of error to cope with this, and they're new. So I think it could be a bit of a shake-up for the payment industry. I think sort of established payment players are probably okay. It might force consumers back into using more carrier billing because more of a safe bet. So yes, there is a potential upside there, I guess. But yes, it's the currency and payment side of it could be potentially difficult. But again, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say that, it wasn't that long ago. Well, actually, I say it wasn't that long ago. It was probably about 10 years ago when the industry was looking at the potential for using cryptocurrencies to settle accounts across borders for precisely the benefits of not being so exposed to the volatility of the currency markets. And of course, our dear old friends, the MNOs, who have settlement rates across their own across borders, international borders on a weekly, daily basis. If there are significant fluctuations in currencies, that's also going to become problematic, I think, which possibly will move us again towards looking at cryptocurrencies as being perhaps a currency that might address that particular issue. I think we all felt it was kind of a bit pie in the sky 7 or 8 years ago. But I think perhaps it could well be an area that starts to become more interesting to big players that are moving large amounts of money across borders. So,
I think
well,
potentially, yeah.
yeah. So so thank you very much. Let's call it a day on Mr. Trump's tariffs. I suspect this is going to be a topic we will return
We
to,
might have to come back to
a
it,
bit
yes.
like AI, on a regular basis. Please don't forget, if you're interested in what we're talking about, or if you've got anything to say, do comment, do like, and please subscribe to our vodcasts. We love to hear your feedback, and as you know, you can hear us on a 2 monthly basis. And view us on all manner of whichever particular channels you prefer to look at. And that's all I have to say on this particular subject. Now we are going to follow on quite nicely from that, because the most topical issue within the telemedia industry right now is, what on earth are we going to be talking about at World Telemedia Dubai, which, as I mentioned earlier, is on the 11th, 12th, and 13th of May at the magnificent Marriott Palm Jumeirah in wonderful Dubai. It's a full-blown World Telemedia show. The exhibition, I think we've got 3 stands left. It's an absolutely packed exhibition with all of the leading aggregators, all the leading payment providers, content providers from all over the world. Obviously, we are seeing a significant increase in the number of Indian guests and participants from Africa, and obviously from the Middle East. And as a result, of course, it gives us a fantastic opportunity to really take our conference and tailor make it to the region in which we are now based. So what we're going to do just very quickly is run through a couple of, well, actually, we'll run through all of the key sessions that we're working on at the moment, and just give people a little bit of a flavour of what they can expect who they can expect to hear from, and what they can expect to learn, and you know, what discussion topics the industry feels are the most important to be able to share and exchange ideas in this, you know, unique environment. So Paul is very much the coordinating this, as you would expect, being our editor. So let's start from the top, Paul. First and foremost, clearly we're in MENA. Let's talk about the MENA market.
Yeah, absolutely. We kick off the conference with a look at the MENA and VAS market and how to unlock it, I guess. We're going to look at, well, we have an hour and a half of deep dive into doing business in the Middle East, essentially. So we're going to look at an overview of the market, the sort of consumer behaviors across the different countries in the region, the key content formats that are driving use and engagement, the challenges to monetization, such as regulations, user engagement, the payment models that are in place. Obviously, a lot of it's carrier billing related, but there's a growing sort of use of wallets, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. The role of those alternative billing mechanisms. So we're going to set the scene with basically some numbers around sort of what the market looks like as a whole, and where some of the key countries are. We're going to hear from Jim Impello on the regulation and compliance sort of market there. In MENA, he's going to give us an overview of where compliance is. It's come on in leaps and bounds over the past few years. It's really why this market is so exciting, in that it works now. Essentially, a lot of the problems that we've seen in it of over regulation, under regulation, all that sort of have been addressed. We're going to hear some of that. There is some more deeper dive stuff about those markets further on in the conference, which we will come to, and then we're going to have an exciting sort of debate with some of the key players from in that market, panelists, TBC, as I'm working on persuading them as to what they need to bring to the party. But stay tuned for that, where again we're going to look at some of the sort of strategic considerations for entering the market, and what those trends in content and services actually mean in a practical sense from what you can offer, and among other things, I think we also do need to address the sort of I guess the political and conflict sort of side of the region, as you were mentioning or mentioned in other podcasts. that we've done about sort of Palestine. You'd think it wouldn't be a big market, but it is. People still want to be entertained. It doesn't matter like what the circumstances are. So I think we'll be looking at all those sorts of things and more. I mean, it's going to be a wide ranging sort of 45-minute discussion where we'll really unpick all those key issues from the key players there in the market.
There's also
Yeah.
there's also as a sort of adjunct to that. I know that we're also going to be presenting a couple of consultants and experts that will actually be able to give our attendees some very practical information on how you can set up, how and why you should set up a business, and particularly in Dubai, but with a view to being able to service the entire MENA region. And some of that sort of A to Z of how to do that is really going to be really useful. And we've also got a payments expert that's then going to be talking about banking and how you move money around, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. And given the current sort of economic circumstances, I suspect that's going to be an extreme, even more interesting session than perhaps it was before.
I think so. I think that's a session that I think we're all actively working on to try and add in something about this sort of tariffs idea that we've discussed on previous podcasts.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think, yes, you're right. That's going to need to be addressed.
Yeah, it's going to
I assume in a month's time. Who knows where we'll be in a month's time with US economic policy?
Exactly.
But while we sort out those details, which we can talk about in our next podcast, elsewhere in the conference, we're doing a very similar deep dive into the African market. So that's the bit in between the North Africa part and South Africa, because we've got another session that's going to drill right down into the South African market. Split it thus because MENA is a region and we're in Dubai. South Africa is sort of a market unto itself because it's quite developed, quite westernized in a way in how it does business, how it is. So we're going to look at that very specifically with our friends at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum who are helping put that session together. But in between, we're looking at the African market. Now, of course, that's a hard thing to do. There's 47 countries in Africa, each of them different. And so we're going to try and pick apart that diversity and that complexity and look at where the different markets are at and which ones are advanced, which ones are less advanced, where the opportunities are, because there are some really key upcoming markets in Africa.
Yeah.
Again, I think there is some areas of political instability where we need to look at where those sorts of markets can and are being addressed. And again, the strategic and business sort of imperatives for how you actually get yourself going in one or some or all of these African markets, what sort of things you need to have in place and what content people want to buy and what services. Generally, it's the same, but I think there are very specific needs and there are language issues and there's also it's a complicated market, but one that really is on the up and one that we are going to really drill down into with currently the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, World Play, TPay, Digital Virgo, Basebone, others TBC, because obviously it's a big continent. We need a big panel because there's a lot to get through.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. Now, let's move on to the afternoon. Now, obviously, World Telemedia, it's all about what people are buying and how and what's engaging those high tech on the move, or even middle tech on the move consumers across the globe. And so we're going to be looking at global entertainment brands, the MVAS markets in a sort of more general way. So tell us a little bit about that. We've got a sponsor for this session as well, haven't we?
We have indeed. So we will be looking at the sort of global entertainment market and how to sort of navigate and manage that, particularly how you deal with some of the brand content, the sort of Disney's and ESPNs of the world. So we're kicking off with a really interesting presentation from our friend and even though he won't admit it, excellent presenter James Flaherty from Perpetuum Media, who is going to really pick apart what the content trends and how you manage that content, how you manage those partnerships, across the region. So it's not just focused on MENA, but it's very pertinent to MENA, Africa, India, all of those places, drawing on his vast international experience. He's also, as he did in Marbella, which proved very interesting, he's going to look at understanding and combating content privacy, particularly stuff that's to do with big brands. So that's a really interesting one. We have a case study presentation from our Shia Info Solutions. Our friend Asmita there is going to be talking us through a lifestyle app that they've launched in India and MENA and India, actually, where she's going to look at how they've used things like gamification and storytelling, spin-off content, and other ways to reach and engage consumers and keep them coming back. This, lifestyle and wellness is a big area, and it's very popular, and there's a lot of sort of money to be made from the sort of value-added services around that. But there's a lot of players in it. So how do you make yours stand out? And I think while her presentation is focused very much on a wellness app, I think there are a lot of lessons from what she can tell us that you can apply to any kind of app, pretty much. So that's going to be a useful and interesting way of looking at content. And then, of course, we're going to bring James and Smita in with people from Hungama and Mobibase to talk through some of the other issues around managing sort of content. So what content, how to create content, where to get content from, particularly sports content, because that's really big and popular globally. It's one of the sort of big sort of pillars of it now. Esports also, and gaming esports sort of crossover. So we're going to look at what content, how you get that content, how you use that content to make it sticky, how you cut it up to get people in. The role, of course, of AI, and again, sort of piracy and fraud. So we'll be discussing all of that, and then we round off the day on day one with payments, of course, because while a lot of it is carrier billing powered, increasingly with a ever sort of youthful audience for these things, we're seeing all these other alternative payment methods, particularly wallets, coming through. So we're going to look at how that all hangs together. We're going to start off with a presentation from Solaris, who really sort of grasped this idea that actually it's not about carrier billing or wallets. It's about there's a whole different sort of way of paying for things. People want to use different things in different ways at different times. So how do you orchestrate that? So they're going to be talking about how you do that on a very practical front with some great examples. And then we're going to bring them together with a few other speakers, TBC, to talk about the sort of wider ideas of sort of alternative payment mechanisms, within which I'm also including carrier billing. So it's how, which ones work for what? How is this useful? How do you make it all work together? How do you manage subscriptions and recurring payments, and how you use payments for acquisition of consumers, tokenization, all of those great things that sort of bring payments together. So it's it used to all be about carrier billing. Now it's just about payments. So what payments are there, and how do you use them, and where are the differences? What horse for what course?
And of course,
that's day one.
Yeah, well, and it goes without saying that. I mean, any publisher, any merchant in the telemedia industry, it's all about reducing basket abandonment rates. One of the great benefits of carrier billing was that was combated that beautifully when people were asked for credit cards and they didn't want to either do it, or it wasn't very practical with a mobile phone. The world has changed significantly now, and clearly, reducing abandonment rates is vitally important. But there's now a whole range of different payment mechanisms, and if you're not offering those to the consumers, then you're leaving money on the table effectively. So World Telemedia is definitely a place where you can understand and meet the providers of the fullest range of payment mechanisms that will help increase and improve your engagement levels and reduce your basket abandonment rates. Let's quickly go on to day two. We've talked a little bit about content, we've talked about payments, we've talked about some specific markets. Then we're kicking off in the morning, and we're going to be moving a little bit across to Southeast Asia, obviously, and India, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so we're going to kick things off with a sort of keynote presentation from Hungama, looking at the sort of evolution of the digital entertainment and media space, and sort of how, I mean, obviously, its transformation is an ongoing sort of process, but I think that there's some interesting insights into sort of like how rapidly this is changing, what's driving that change, particularly AI, and how to actually harness that to create the sort of services that you want to offer and that consumers want to use. So I think in many ways the market is consumer driven, and they want what they want, and you've got to fill that gap. And I think we're going to have some interesting insights into how you keep pace with that sort of change. We're then going to drill down, as we have done with MENA and Africa, into the Indian and South Asian markets. So we're going to look across India, which of course is a huge sort of almost self-contained market in itself, with 1.4 billion consumers. I think it's got about 60% mobile penetration rate across the country. It's huge. So we're going to look at India, but we're also going to look at the sort of neighbouring South Asian countries of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and possibly even a bit further afield into Southeast Asia, because there's a lot of opportunity there. China will probably be mentioned, particularly in terms of supplying equipment and that kind of thing. So we'll be drilling deeply into that. We'll be looking at the regulatory setup as well in India and Southern Asia. And then we sort of have a little revisit to MENA, where our friends at MCP Insights are going to give us a sort of hour-long discussion around de-risking your sort of growth processes in a lot of those MENA markets. So they're looking at some really key ones, including sort of Iraq and Kuwait and places like that. So we're going to get some really interesting stuff there, I think, from them about how to operate sort of compliantly within those markets, and where the sort of compliance in those markets has gone. So that's our morning, and then we round off the conference and the event with an afternoon that's really dedicated essentially to user acquisition. So
I just noticed that. I mean, the way that the conference is flowing means that any attendee really doesn't matter what angle you're coming from. The sort of the pillars of telemedia are being covered, really beautifully by the way that this conference is being put together. And as you say, an afternoon of we talk about the challenges of a constantly changing media landscape, and as I mentioned in a previous podcast, that seemed to be something we were talking about many years ago, but boy oh boy, it's as relevant now as it ever was then. So it's great to get MEF covering that. Obviously they've got input from a slightly different membership group, and they have slightly different perspectives on things, or are privy to information and data that perhaps some of our attendees might not be. So it's going to be really useful to see what their takeaways are in terms of the challenges from the changing media landscape. And of course, no surprise that in the headline there, they're picking out AI as being the biggest influencer on that. So again, we then move on, as you rightly pointed out, to talk about traffic and marketing. So talk us through the sort of three till beer time.
Three till beer time. I think it's actually two till beer time.
2 till beer time.
So it's many hours of user acquisition. So yes, we kick off with our friends at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, who are going to be looking at the rapidly changing face of media buying in the age of AI. So obviously, you have to buy your marketing through affiliate marketing and other publishing sources and social media and Google and everywhere else. So, how do you do that? And I think these days AI plays a big role in shaping how you do that. underpins things like real-time bidding and predictive analysis of who's looking at what, because obviously that's how you start to target. And sort of modern marketing, whatever channel you use, is very much about sort of looking at sort of trying to individualize sort of who you're targeting at scale. Dynamic creative optimization, so adapting what it is you're showing to those people at that moment through that channel. Audience segmentation, the opportunities and challenges AI presents in doing that, and how automation, data and machine learning are going to drive all this. So a really interesting panel there that Ansel at MEF is putting together. I can reveal that Mesh Ads are taking part in it, others are to be confirmed. So that's a really interesting kickoff to the afternoon, I think, about the sort of like where AI is helping in sort of driving marketing. We're then going to look at global traffic generation, particularly through Google. So we're looking at how to do that with the sort of frameworks that are in place for driving traffic and creating traffic. So how you use Google, how you use social media, how you use Google and social media. The regional differences, particularly between MENA, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe, with how you do that, for those that are looking more internationally and more beyond the sort of region that we're actually doing the event in. And how to measure it, and how those sort of KPIs that sort of give you your measure. Because obviously with any market, you've got to understand what the ROI or the return on ad investment, the ROAS, is going to give you. And so there's some really interesting stuff there that Chris from Mesh Ads is going to talk through in a really sort of well, I've seen the sort of notes for his presentation. It's a really detailed and really excellent presentation. Actually, there's anything you need to know about traffic generation, he's covering it there in a mere 20 minutes. So one not to miss.
I can't wait to see that. Well, and of course, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Google, but of course, one of the things that we've really noticed in terms of the sort of changing marketing landscape is, of course, Google's not the only show in town right now, and there's going to be, I think, quite a lot of talk about other sources are available, like the likes of
Yeah,
Instagram, TikTok, that kind of stuff. And I believe that we've got another session following on, which is going to sort of expand our views on
absolutely.
where else our merchants can start getting traffic from.
Absolutely. We're looking at the sort of new sources of embedded traffic. So we are talking about Google Ads therein, because it is relevant, but we're also going to be looking at social media, like you say, the TikToks, Instagrams. That's where a lot of sort of interest is. Yeah, there is a tie between how people Google stuff and how they then get served up results that are on social media. So there is an overlap between the Google sort of search side and social media advertising. We're also going to look at affiliate marketing, because let's not forget, a lot of traffic's always been driven by affiliate marketing. That's still there and still very much a viable traffic generator. It just comes with a whole new load of challenges in the AI era. But we're going to deal and cover with all of those. So that's happening at about 3:20 on day two. And then leads us into a final session at 4 o'clock with our friends from Sam Agency, who are going to look at cracking the high ARPU code. So they're going to look at what it really takes to acquire users that drive revenue. So not just volume, but actual people that are going to spend money. And how do you find and pull out those people, and how do you market to them, and how do you make those guys work? And that is across all the things like Google Ads, TikTok, all of those kind of things. So a really nice, positive, I think, sort of traffic generation finale to the event. And yes, then we all head to the bar and discuss what we've learnt over the 2 days that we've spent locked in a room with me and all these fantastic panelists.
Well, there you go. If that isn't enough to entice you to come to Dubai on the 11th to 13th of May for World Telemedia, the inaugural World Telemedia MENA event, I don't know what will. As Paul rightly said, the MVAS, mobile payments, alternative payments, mobile marketing, mobile content, premium content industry comes together twice a year now. This is a really major opportunity for you to meet all the leading players from across the globe. a truly international audience. Please do go to wtevent.com. You'll find a landing page there which will tell you all about Dubai, will tell you all about Marbella. We would recommend that you come to them both. Most people are booking two shows at this year, which I'm very pleased to see. There are a very few stands left if anyone's interested in promoting their business and their brand in Dubai. Same goes for Marbella. And finally, I would say that if you're watching this podcast and it's still the second week in May and you're interested to tell your story, or you feel you've got a valuable contribution to make to any of the strategic areas that Paul's just pointed out, now is the time to comment. Now is the time to connect with us because we could still possibly consider your application to be a panelist or a speaker in Dubai. Please remember to like and subscribe us. And thank you very much for watching. Paul and I will be back in 2 weeks' time. We will be ever so close to heading out to sunny Dubai. So we'll probably be in our vests and have our hankies and our Panama hats ready at the ready. But until then, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Paul. I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
You will indeed, mate. Take care. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you
Thank
soon.
you very much. Bye bye.